Good evening and welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm your host, Joshua Solomon, and with me as always is the Honorable J.P. Marzullo. How you doing, J.P.?
I'm good. I just can't figure out what clothes to take out, though. I mean, you know, one day it's like 90 and the next day it's 30. And but I won't complain about it when it's like 10 below and 6 feet of snow.
I cross fingers. I hope we're done with the brutal heat and humidity.
Yeah,
Right,
I
so
started splitting some wood today, and it was so hot. I did like 6 pieces, and that was the end of it. Because it was just way too hot.
You're swinging the axe yourself? Or
No, I have an electric wood splitter that does up to 4 tons. You know, it'll break a big log, 4 tons, but then you have to stack it, and you know, and Donna helps, and so we're both tired and it's hot. So, but we're consistent. Anyway.
All right. We have one of our favorite guests, been on the show a few dozen times at least. Lynne Blankenbeker. How you doing, Lynne?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I don't know
thanks
what
for the Navy hat.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had
gotta have Navy here.
I don't know what to call you anymore.
She's either captain or the honorable. She served in the Senate and the State House, rather.
You keep having different jobs. Last time we were on, it was right after you came back from American Samoa.
Yeah.
And they were all corrupt, and you didn't want to be there anymore. And now you're at the Pentagon. Are they all corrupt too?
First of all, I have to say,
Oh, good. This is gonna be a short show, folks.
the first thing I have to say is that I do work for the Chief of Naval Operations, so anything I say tonight is not the views of the United States Navy. I have to put the disclaimer out there for the Chief.
Do they call you Attorney Blankenbeker, or do they call you Captain Blankenbeker?
They call me Lynne. Or Miss Blankenbeker.
Well, you're at the Pentagon, right?
Yeah,
so, I mean,
you
know, if you were still in uniform, you'd outrank a whole bunch of people there.
You know, but you would think so, but, you know, you can't swing a dead cat in the Pentagon without hitting an admiral or a general. I mean, there's a lot of admirals and generals.
That's exactly what I heard. So
and captains get coffee there.
My stepfather he did a tour at the Pentagon under the first Bush administration, and he said captains and full bird colonels were just a dime a dozen.
Yeah. So we're really glad you came back to see us.
Thanks for having me. I love to come do this show.
I'm sure that wasn't your only reason for coming back, but why don't you tell the folks that are viewing why you came back, not only to be on our show, of course, which is the main reason.
Well, that was the primary reason.
Yeah, but we talked a little bit about
the amount of money people spend on airline flights just to be on our show.
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Yeah. No, I came back because my doctor's here, and this is where I get my care at the VA. Yeah. And so I'm really fortunate that I do get my care at the VA, and the VA here in Manchester is tremendous. I love my doctor, Dr. Terry. Give a little shout out for her. And this time, for the first time, I got to use the dental services, and they were fantastic. I've never had so many dental X-rays, and I mean, just the level of care. I have to say, at the VA, I've been for years now doing this little anecdotal, you know, information gathering. And so every person who takes care of me over there, I always ask them, did you serve in the military? And I've only run across 2 people so far. And
that have served.
That have served. All the rest of them are civilians. And so very interestingly, this is a group of people who go to work every single day to take care of people like me and other warriors. And I always tell them, you know, thank you, because I do think we're a unique group of people. We come with very unique baggage. and so it's so nice because they all say, I couldn't imagine taking care of anybody else. You know, yesterday I was over at the orthopedic clinic, and I ran into a nurse I worked with at Dartmouth Hitchcock. And she said, nope, I came here. I love it here. I don't know why I didn't start out here. You know, it's just fantastic to be able to care for veterans. She loves the stories and the people and the gratitude. But I think the best part, you know, as a nurse and an attorney, I always have young nurses that ask me, how do I keep from getting sued, or what should I do so I don't get sued? And I always tell the nurses, you got to treat your patients like your family. You know, and I said, and stop. I mean, the machines are important. The machines give you data, right? But I said, if you just go in and take 15 minutes and wash your patient's hair, not yours, but if you go in and wash your patient's hair, you are going to learn more about your patient in that 15 minutes than any monitor is going to show you. You're going to get them relaxed. You'll see what their real respiratory rate is. You're going to feel their skin and see what their skin temperature is and what their skin turgor is. You're going to hear all about their families. You're going to learn, and you can watch and observe them, and you can learn a lot. You can see their color, and right? It's an important assessment tool. But I don't think today in the hospital we have the time or the luxury to do that. The VA, those people make the time. They will sit down, they will tell you a story, listen to your stories. They want to know about your family. How's your dog? Do you have a cat? What's going on? And those things matter, especially for veterans who maybe struggle with a little PTSD. When you ask somebody, hey, do you have a pet at home? Tell me about your dog. What do you do? Do you have a goat? Whatever the people have, right? And then they start talking about their service animal or their animal that they have at home that functions as a service animal but isn't really deemed one. And you learn a lot, like what are the things that bring them relaxation? What are the things that are working for them? Do they have hope for the future? You don't have to ask somebody always, are you going to commit suicide? You can tell because somebody will sit there and tell you, hey, I got this plan, I'm going to do this thing. Those aren't people who are thinking about meaning a plan to do something positive, right? And so I love the care at the VA. I love my VA providers.
So that's, I don't want to be negative, but that's a little bit of an opposite of what we envision. Like we hear horror stories about the VA and payments and the administrative stuff that folks have to go through to get their care at the VA. It doesn't sound like you've got that same vision.
I've never had that problem. But I think, if you talk to, first of all, I think, if you go all the way back to the Vietnam era veterans, we all know that was a disaster, and America got it completely wrong on every level with our Vietnam veterans, right? It was those Vietnam veterans who made sure it didn't happen to the Desert Storm veterans, right? They were going to make sure that they were the loud voice to make sure that people coming out of Desert Storm, which was the next big conflict, were treated properly and taken care of. It took a little while for the VA, it's a governmental agency, nothing's going to happen very quickly, and it took a while for them to kind of turn the corner and start making those inroads. But now people are wanting to go work at the VA. It used to be like the operating room. They used to have an operating room at the VA in Manchester, but it had a lot of problems, right? There was problems with the central sterile system, and there were leaks and stuff like that. They closed it down. So that service wasn't offered anymore. Unfortunately, because Congress has now passed the Mission Act and some of these other acts where we can go out into the community and get that care we need, now they'll be able to rebuild what they need to rebuild if they want to provide care at the VA. So have you been over to the VA Medical Center? Have you ever get over there?
I have not. I know several people who work over there.
Well, I will tell you, every single time I
Veterans.
every single time I go, I have to go to a different place for a service because they're always rebuilding and making it bigger and better, and then they're providing. It's clean. It's a happy, cheerful place. I don't know. And the thing I love the most is when you're sitting in the waiting room, which is never very long. But when you're sitting in the waiting room, there's always somebody with a war story, right?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And they all think that I'm a caregiver. And so they're like, who are you with here today, honey? I'm like, me. So it is kind of cute. I love it. It's just great.
Do you get raised eyebrows when folks find out that you're 30 some odd years officer in the United States Navy?
Yeah, sometimes. The funny thing is like where I get the most pushback is like if I park my car at Lowe's in the veteran parking spot, invariably somebody will walk up to me and say, you really shouldn't park there without your husband.
Oh, no. Oh, my God.
Here, you want to hear the best one? This is the best one.
And then you drop the 32 years in the Navy, you can call me captain.
And I just usually say, hey, one of the great things about being an American is that women get to serve in the military, and I'm very fortunate. I'm the veteran, and I get to park here, and I'm really grateful to Lowe's for letting me have this parking spot today. You just have to help people. But the best one, though, is I used to do a lot of funeral honor details, and so I'd go up to Boston a lot, and I'd be in my uniform, and of course I have wings because I'm a flight nurse, and oftentimes I would stop at the grocery store on my way home from the funeral or whatever, and I was in Sam's Club one day, and some man walked up to me and asked me what airline I was a flight attendant for. I had a rack of ribbons like this, not
so
as big as General.
So how quick was he sent to the hospital? That's really the question.
So the funny thing is,
after he wiped the blood off his face.
and I said to him, I said, this is, then I took it as an opportunity to educate, right? And I was like, this is a Navy uniform. That's what all these ribbons mean. And I said, I know the uniform looks a little bit like an airline pilot. And I said, I'm very interested why you thought I might be a flight attendant and not a pilot, because women can also be pilots too. But
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's okay. You know what? For as many jokes as there are, and I know a lot of people are really sensitive about it, and there are women who have fought really hard to find, to find maybe equality or equity, right?
I'm just surprised that something that blatant has happened to you so many times.
But you can't be offended by it, right? We are, I was so fortunate to be born a woman in the United States. I can drive a car, I can go to school, I can be a nurse and an attorney and a naval officer. I can be a mother and a wife. I can be all those things at once. I can be a state representative. As a matter of fact, I was all those things at once. But you can do that because I was born in the United States. I can drive a car. I can do all these things. Right? I can vote. And, unless and until you've been to a foreign country where women can't do that, you don't really realize how good we have it. So there is a generation of people who were born way before me, although I'm getting up there, that that wasn't the societal norm in the United States. And so rather than get offended by it, I just use it as an opportunity to say, hey, I'm so fortunate that people of your generation forged the path so people like me could have these opportunities, right? So
yeah, I commend you for taking it in stride that way. I just think I feel like someone who has spent that much time and effort in your career. You are a Navy captain. You are a medical nurse. You are a combat nurse, and a lawyer. Like, you have fought very hard for these things.
That just means I'm going to get blood out of you one way or another.
And exactly, one way or the other, you're gonna, yeah. But it just seems, like I said, I commend you for taking it all in stride, because after that much work, I think anyone would be right to demand a little bit of respect and expect that in the United States that somebody would realize these things and not make the assumption that you're not a veteran and not make the assumption that you're a flight attendant and not a pilot. Like, it doesn't compute with me, right? And I guess that's just.
I was, probably my best military story of all stories. When I was a little girl, my mother, when she would, fix our school lunches, she'd kind of, go, oh, I could be a colonel right about now. And one day I asked her, I was like, why do you always say that? She's like, I served in the World War II. I was an Army nurse. I did not know that. And I was like, oh, okay. And she said, but I wasn't allowed to continue to serve because I got married and had children. And women back then couldn't continue in service. Yeah. She had to make a choice to be a mother, a wife, or a military officer. And fast forward, so what was that, 1940s, right? Mm-hmm. Fast forward, here it is, 2013. I'm standing at the Pentagon. My boss was a 3-star admiral, female. She was a pilot. Her husband was an 05. She was an 089, right? Right, like an 08. And she had 2 grown children, and my daughter was pinning my eagle on my collar. And I looked over at my daughter, who was in ROTC at the time. And in the Navy, we only wear one rank, and then for nurse corps, and then we wear our corps device on the other. And so I had the other eagle, and I was going to give it to my daughter and tell her, hey, you can make this a star, right? Because that's your next step, right? But anyway, and I looked at my daughter, and I just said, Shannon, I just achieved my mother's impossibility. I'm a wife, a mother, and I just made colonel.
Yeah, you did.
Right? Like, I made it. And so it took my mother and a lot of women after her, who kind of kept saying, hey, look, we can do it. Give us a chance. Let us show you. And so there were a lot of really credible, hardworking women out there that forged that path for me that I got to walk very easily. And but it was because of them, So, grateful for all those women that went before me. That's why I love going to the veterans home, right? See, so there are women over at the veterans home in Tilton, right? And those little ladies are sitting there, and I'm like, man, you guys, you forged the path for me.
Good.
Yeah.
Great. So, you work for Office of Naval Operations?
I do, and the Chief of Naval Operations is the first ever female Joint Chiefs. Yep, she is a 4-star admiral. Lisa Franchetti definitely earned her way there. She forged, for ship drivers. She's commanding officer of destroyers. She has a phenomenal resume, definitely the right person for the job. A lot of people asked me after she was nominated to be for the Joint Chiefs, they said, hey, how do you feel about a female? And I said, hey, all I want is fully and most qualified. Male, female, I don't care. I want fully and most qualified. When I read her resume, I was blown out of the water. But again, this is a woman who had tremendous mentors. She had pitfalls along the way, but found a way to get herself in there, had the right resume. She's at the helm now. She's doing a tremendous job. And
so is your role, are you just kind of doing legal work?
Oh, no.
Or
can you tell us?
Can you tell us what your role is?
Absolutely.
I'm just curious.
Well, since we're on the topic of women, so my job is policy advisor to Chief of Naval Operations on women, peace, and security.
Oh, wow.
So have you heard of women, peace, and security?
No.
I have not.
Okay, so women, peace, and security. In 2000, the United Nations passed a resolution 1325, because on women, peace, and security. And they recognized that women, when they are brought to the table when it came to operational planning or planning for crisis or peace negotiations, that those were sustainable. So they knew that 50% of our population across the world is women, but women are the most underrepresented population everywhere. The United States Navy is only about 20% female. The Air Force is about 21%, Marine Corps is about 14%, and I think Army is right around 21%. In 1984, when I came in the military, when I went to ROTC, they were trying to get to 25% female. We have never made that benchmark in 40 years. We've never made that benchmark of getting to 25% female. But they're still working on it, right? And so what they recognize, though, is that women, are, even though they're 50% of the population, they're just underrepresented. But they're also our most vulnerable population when it comes to crisis, disasters, humanitarian problems, or conflict. So I like to use Ukraine as a good example. When you look at the Ukraine, what did we see in 2021 when that war broke out? A bunch of women and children getting on trains, going to an uncertain fate, leaving their country, leaving their homes, leaving their husbands who were the breadwinners. They were ripe for exploitation, for trafficking, and women will do anything to take care of their babies. And there was no representation for them. There was nobody looking out for them. There was nobody protecting them from gender-based violence. There was nobody, right? And so that's what Women, Peace, and Security was about. So the UN recognized this in 2000, passed a resolution, 109 nations signed on to it. The United States was the 50th nation to sign on. And then in 2017, President Trump was the very first leader of any nation to pass it as a law, and it's now the Women, Peace, and Security Act of 2017, passed by Donald J. Trump. And so now that compelled the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, USAID, and a bunch of other, government-run organizations. So it's whole of government, not just the military and not just the United States Navy, of now making sure that women have a role to meaningfully participate when it comes to planning. And here's why it's so important. Because if you look at, let's look at Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, the women in Afghanistan, their role was to raise the children and serve the tea. Right?
And serve the tea.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they would be in these houses. Well, their children were being radicalized, but because they were oppressed and had no voice, they couldn't do anything about it. And these women loved their babies, but they knew their babies were going to go fight for the Taliban. They were going to get radicalized and have to go fight and put on suicide vests. And they could do nothing about it. They also could hear the conversations going on, and they knew where the illegal arms were going. They knew what some of these operations that were being played, but they were so oppressed they couldn't share that information. Had we learned more about the culture and known and could have gotten in, we could have stopped the radicalization, which was feeding the Taliban new recruits. And think about how many American soldiers wouldn't have lost their arms or legs. And we could have gotten good intel. And it wasn't until about 2011 that when we figured this out, we started sending the female engagement teams in. And so then the women, we had these all Army, female Army units that were going in, because men didn't have access to the women. And so these women, these female engagement teams, went in and started.
I would feel like there would still be a barrier there, even though you had women who could technically be in the same room and be alone with other women, with the Muslim women. I would still think that there would be a barrier there where the men would try to prevent that.
With the U.S. women?
Yes.
Oh, no, it was the U.S. women and the Afghan women alone.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. But the Afghan men I would think would be very reticent to have U.S. women talking to their women.
No, it was a very trust-building sort of thing, right? Where they were in there, whether it was teaching them how to wash their hands, to take it. We were doing this when I was in Desert Storm. I was going out with a British midwife, and we were just trying to get the Omani women to have their babies in a hospital rather than at home. And we were doing prenatal care.
But you didn't find any resistance from?
Nope, because we were there offering a service that was good for them, right?
Okay.
And so we were there teaching them something that was a valuable health-related service. But it's not just in times of conflict. So we talked about Ukraine, we talked about Afghanistan. When there's a natural disaster, when they had the tsunamis over in Indonesia a few years ago, all the men go to work and they went up to work up the hill. And the women were left down in the villages, right? So when the tsunami came in, the villages were destroyed. When the country sent in the aid and the relief, it all went up the mountain to the men. And so the women were left down there. The ones that were left starving to death with no water or food because they didn't bring the relief efforts in, because nobody did a gender analysis to find out where the people were. And so these women were left. And so part of Women Peace, it's kind of got like 3 or 4 objectives, right? One of them is to make sure that we as the United States model how important it is to have women at the table when it comes to operational planning. Can't think of a better way than the United States Navy is doing right now with Lisa Franchetti, Admiral Franchetti at the helm, right? We are demonstrating to the rest of the world that we do value female participation, meaningful participation at that level, right, for planning. But then that we also make sure that we engage with our partner nations and that we work with them to make sure that all women have equal access to recovery services or to relief services, whether it's access to goods. When we go in, as the military does, when we go in and we blow up an area, right? We dismantle a community. There's some communities where the women are the water fetchers, right, and they need to be able to get to the water to bring the water back to the community, right? But that part of the water fetching isn't just to get the water. That's the only place that the women can socialize alone. And so if we take that well and we put it in the center of town and take away their ability to be able to socialize, then we disrupt their lines of communication. So that's why when we have this gender perspective and we learn the culture and we learn why that's important, we facilitate that.
Like deliberately, instead of putting a well where it's convenient to everyone, deliberately create a new well over here? So
No. That we look at the culture and we recognize the importance of that well beyond just getting clean water to the village, right? Like make sure that we set it up. Another good example, when we had Operation Allies Welcome, I don't know if you heard of that, but in 2021 when we had our abrupt drawdown from Afghanistan.
Is that what we're calling it? Just an abrupt drawdown. That's a very good way of putting it.
So then we brought some Afghan folks back to the United States, especially like our interpreters and some of the people who really had targets on their backs. We had to get them out of there and get them to the United States because they were helpful to us during the crisis, during the conflict, right? So they set up several camps. We brought the Afghans in. But how you position that camp, because recognizing that the Muslim community does things differently, right? Like women can't walk without male escorts, and so making sure that we situate them in a way, except for like when they went to the bathrooms, but then making sure that these single women weren't walking through a single man's camp that's unlit to get to the bathrooms, which would put them at risk for gender-based violence and those sorts of things. So looking at that. Making sure that we gave them the appropriate place to pray, because women don't pray in the same place as men, and making sure that we set up a prayer tent for them as well. And those sorts of things, making sure that their kids were getting the proper immunizations, because no offense to men, but when you're not raising the babies, those things don't come to the forefront of your mind. Like when women are at the table, we say, hey, wait a minute, women are taking care of children. Do we have a hospital? Do they have schools? Did we put in immunizations? Whatever the things are that's important to that culture when it comes to women and raising children and the elderly. But it's not just about women. It's also about, it's humanitarian. It's about human rights. It's not about just women's rights, because we also look at other marginalized. In Afghanistan, young boys were these young dancers, and then they were sexually abused, right? And so making sure that we protect young boys is too.
So what other country would you say, or what other countries are doing the same thing you're doing here?
Well, there's 109 of them, so we've got.
But what would you say would be the, like your top 10 maybe?
Oh, I'll tell you who's got it going is Denmark. Denmark figured it out a long time ago. Denmark's got it going good. Ireland, believe it or not. So back in Ireland, they had, for lack of a better word, and I'm not really strong on Ireland politics, but they had some Republican women and some Democrat women, right? And these women, but Parliament, or whatever their government is called, wasn't taking women's interests into consideration when they were passing laws. And the women in both groups were like, this is ridiculous, we are not represented. So they decided to put parties aside, come together as a women's coalition, be strong enough and big enough, this almost sounds like the suffrage movement, become big enough that then they got themselves elected. And in the beginning, the men didn't treat them all that great, but they just kept chipping away at it. And soon there were enough women that the votes changed. And the votes were more female friendly. And so they were more equitable, and that women did get more rights, right? And so this was a two-party system where they were totally on the opposite ends of the spectrum, but they decided that women's rights was the one thing they could come together on, and so they did that. And now you go look at the Ireland, legislature, and it's equal balanced, and the women have a strong voice, and now the men are saying, oh my goodness, we can't even imagine a legislature without them. Can you imagine if our state house didn't have any women? I mean, think about it.
No.
No, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think about some of those really strong voices in our state house, people who had really valuable things to say and offer. Not necessarily women related, or whatever, but they had very important things to say.
So I this is all good stuff, and it's all agreeable stuff. I guess I'm having some trouble. Like there's a big disconnect between making sure that something and some group doesn't get left behind in a war zone, say in Afghanistan or any location that is in crisis. There's a very big difference between that and a location where there's not crisis, like Denmark or Ireland. And so what is the role, what is this UN's role in trying to enforce this in areas where there isn't conflict, like Ireland?
Well, it's not just about conflict, it's about disasters too. Anytime that there's a natural disaster, or anytime we provide a relief effort. So that's why USAID is involved and Homeland Security is involved. And, just to your point, they're also our allies. So they also show up. But this is really, so the first part of it is women, which I wish they wouldn't have called it Women, Peace, and Security, because it's really human rights. This is really about human rights. Because you have to know, I'm not a feminist, right? I'm not one of these people.
No, I understand.
Right?
I see two distinct kind of areas here, right? I see the idea of either conflict or disaster, or there's a crisis taking place, and we need to make sure that certain things are accounted for, taken care of, underrepresented groups get what they need to survive whatever this situation is. And then there's the political aspect of it, which you just kind of discussed with Ireland.
Yeah. But that's really...
Are we really going to get involved in the
No, we don't get involved in the
things?
political side. That's just a byproduct of what, what happened was, that was just a really good example of how when we bring women to the table, 50% of our population is female. if nothing else, this should be a force multiplier for the, for the military and part of our capabilities, right? Like if we're excluding, and
I absolutely don't disagree with that.
Yeah. So if we're excluding 50% of the population for whatever reason, and I look at the like being a female in the military, right? Do we provide women the same level of mentoring that the men get so that they can meet those gates? And do they have the same opportunity to compete for those foundational things that build upon to get you promoted so that you can be selected to be a commanding officer or an executive officer or those sorts of things? And when you look at a structure, if you just look at the raw numbers and you look at the structure of the militaries and you look at the percentage of women that are, you got to look at it, but it's got to be a per capita, right? There are some career fields in the military where 0.1% of the people who make it to the highest enlisted rank, which is E9, or to 06, is 0.1% are women. And so they're not getting they just need equitable access. We're not saying promote them because they're female. We're saying give them the same mentoring, give them the same opportunities, let them go to the same school. Here's a really good example, boot camp. Okay, so we were sending kids to boot camp. They're all young, 18, 19, 20-year-old, generally youngsters going to boot camp. The diet at the chow hall, everybody gets a balanced diet. They give you a balanced diet. It was designed for a man. So when the women were competing against other women for the physical fitness scores, and the men were competing against other men, because we have two different standards. We have a male standard and a female standard. They recognize that women and men are different, right?
You don't have 36 different standards like the Olympics?
No. We have a men's standard and a women's standard. Okay, so when you look at those standards, right, and you look at, so the men were able to max out their score. They were able to get a really high score, get an outstanding high or whatever. But the women weren't, even though they had their own threshold, they weren't able to achieve that maximum score. So when everything else is equal, no demerits, you did well on your test, whatever, and they need a discriminator for who's going to be the kid who gets picked to go do the special assignment, right? At the end of the day, PT scores are a discriminator, right? And so if you scored an outstanding high and you scored an excellent, well, the outstanding high is going to get the deference, right? What they discovered was young girls have different nutritional needs than young men. And one of those is that women are iron depleted. And when you're iron depleted, your oxygen carrying capabilities of your body aren't as good. So they started giving the women iron supplements, and their PT scores went up.
Wow.
And that is a gender perspective, right? This isn't about giving them something special, lowering a standard. This is about giving them the tools that they need to be successful.
And that's a purely biological issue.
Exactly. And these are the things we look at all across the board when it comes to women, peace, and security. So I wish I would have taken women out of it, but they didn't. But then the other part of it is peace and security. And so a lot of our combatant commands, so you have SouthCom, EUCOM, INDOPACOM, AFRICOM, we got all these CyberCom, I don't know, they got all these combatant commands out there. They are really the ones who engage with our partner nations in those regions and work on security cooperation efforts. And at the end of the day, I know we're war fighters, and the mission of the military is to fight wars, but at the end of the day, if we can peacefully come to a resolution, it's better off for America and better off for those who fight the wars, right? And so there's a huge security cooperation piece to that, which the combatant commands have really done well with. So we got SouthCom down there. I was the Women, Peace, and Security Advisor to the Joint Task Force down there. And part of that, too, was making sure that our U.S. soldiers, females, were protected against gender-based violence from the community we were serving. Because if you're in a community where the culture looks at women differently, our women soldiers weren't getting treated well by the community we were in trying to help.
Well, that's what I was kind of referring to earlier. Is if we have a bunch of an all-female unit in a country that's historically hostile towards women, I would think that there would be some resistance there, and there needs to be exactly that, some other factor that helps them get their foothold in there.
Well, and that's part of the gender base, or the gender perspective that we take in there, and we do these gender analysis to determine how they're going to receive us. So we don't want to send women in to do any task with a predominantly male community of people who either culturally or for religious reasons are not going to accept those females, right? And so we have to be sensitive to that culture that we're in there trying to help as well. And if sending women in isn't the answer, then we need to make sure we get the right male group in there to engage so that we do get to the desired outcome.
Is this something that's known further down? Like if somebody wants to be like you're recruiting somebody.
Yeah.
Is this something that you would propose to those women who are, being recruited?
Yeah.
This is the first time I've heard about
Yeah.
it, right? So I'm glad you came to tell us about it. But you don't typically hear about that.
No, and we're really trying hard. Right now, one of the things that I'm doing is trying to help develop an implementation plan for the Chief of Naval Operations to go all the way down through naval operations and get to the deck plate. We'll build a gender workforce. The gender workforce or gender network is usually there's a gender advisor that sort of sits regionally, and then we have what they call gender focal points that are at good touch points where with commands that are going to engage, whether it's with partner nations or in security cooperation or those sorts of things. And so we're just trying to identify where it's appropriate. Is it appropriate for every community in the Navy? And probably the answer is no, but we got to identify those communities. And then how do we get that information down? I was just having a conversation over the last couple of days with just, with CENTCOM, which is out, Central Command, which is over near what's going on in Israel, right? And just saying, hey, is there anything you need from us up here that we can do to help you down in CENTCOM from a women, peace, and security perspective? And so there's this big network, and it's growing every single day. We have joint staff, which is, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Command, all together doing training so that we're teaching the same principles and making sure that it goes out. It's not just the Navy, it's everywhere. It's, all services.
So how many people would you guess that are involved?
Are in a gender in the whole Department of Defense, there's got to be hundreds. There's hundreds right now that are trained, and there's, but I mean, there's also 1 million Army people, and there's, so we really got some work to do. But in 2017, when President Trump passed this as a law, they said by 2019, we need a whole of government strategic plan, an implementation plan, and a national action plan. And so that came out in 2000, and Department of State put that out in 2019. But in the law, because like they always do this in the law, they said, and you better do a reset, a relook at this 4 years later. So we're at that 4-year point right now where we're looking and saying, okay, this worked, this didn't work, this is where where we need to expand now, and this is what we need to do. So we've written another, the Department of Defense, the Department of State wrote an action plan. It came down from the White House. That one came out into 2023. Department of Defense is now updating their implementation plan. We'll have a new one soon. And then from there, I can develop the Navy's plan for getting that out to the Navy.
So there are areas of the world where there are conflict right now. We've got Israel and Ukraine, Jordan, the West Bank, all of these. Are we beginning to put in? Are we doing anything for these areas like the Ukraine? We're sending them money and arms, but are we sending them plans and peacemakers and?
That I can't answer. I am not privy to that kind of confidential or, that kind of.
But this whole peace and security planning, I would think
the
that
combatant commands are out there. So Central Command that's got, the AOR over there and the area of responsibility over.
Because there are groups that are in crisis over there that need to be taken care of. Do we have eyes on them?
Absolutely. AFRICOM's working hard because we've got a big operation down, anti-piracy. And that's the other thing is this isn't just about war-related stuff, right? Over in the China Sea, which is a big issue way down in South and Central America, you know, like Ecuador and Peru and that area. Fishing, especially in those coastal areas, is very important. And now we've got illegal fishing operations down there, and they're decimating the reefs. So they're overfishing, they're taking the fish away, and so the communities there are starving, and they're losing their economy as a result of that. And so we are helping, and then what happens is with us with ships is we get out there and we find out that there are whether they traffic people through there too, right? And so when there are refugees out there or people who are trying to escape on these small boats, and we intercept those or we catch, you know, we find those, making sure that we're taking care of the women, children, and elderly that are on those boats, making sure that they're not being trafficked and making sure that they're not being exploited. You know, that's important too. So we have a lot of missions out there. Some of them are humanitarian, some of them are incidental. But, you know, we are the world's superpower, and we are, you know, the rest of the world looks to us to do the right thing, and human rights is huge for our country. We've always been about human rights, and so we're never going to give that up, I don't think. I don't see that happening.
So you work for CNO. I'm reading about China building ships like there's no tomorrow. They're building ships as fast as we were building Liberty ships in World War II. In 1985, we had, or 1985, in the first Gulf War, we would send a carrier task force to the Gulf. It would include the carrier. It would include something like 7 or 8 cruisers, 6 or 7 destroyers, 2 submarines, and up to 90 aircraft in the air wing. We are now sending a carrier strike group over to the Gulf to support Israel, and we're leaving the other group over there. And this carrier strike group that's going over there is 4 cruisers, 2 destroyers, 1 submarine, and 60 aircraft in the wing. We've got a problem.
I know nothing about it.
We are retiring 48 ships over the next 4 years. That's 1 a month, and our Navy is just being decimated with. So anyway, you work for the
I work
for the
for
CNO, and I'm watching the Navy just lose its ability to project any type of power, whether it's military might or humanitarian might. I'm just seeing it just being thrown down the trash.
And I'm going to be honest with you, that is not something I'm privy to. I do not have that information. I don't sit in those offices at the Pentagon that concern shipbuilding, ship placement. I know nothing about that. I can tell you this.
It's very depressing.
Without, you know, and again, I'm not speaking for CNO in any way, shape, or form, or the United States Navy, but I have a lot of confidence in our United States Navy. We have a tremendous leader at the helm. She is, she's smart, she's informed, she knows what she's doing, and you know, our nation needs to trust that our Joint Chiefs are doing the right thing. I don't have any information that would lead me to believe otherwise. But again, that is not information that I possess.
I know. I
cannot speak from any kind of authority on that.
As a Navy man, I know. You see these things, you know, from Reagan's 600 ship Navy, and now we're under 300.
Well, maybe we're leaner, faster. I don't know. You know, I know that when we had to deploy for COVID, we had the right. You know, I mean, that was the invisible enemy, right? And we had the right number of people, and we had the right number of resources to get to the places we needed to get to, you know, help our nation when we were first at the very beginning of combating that crisis. You know, somehow, some way, way over my pay grade, you know, people are making decisions and staffing and manning and equipping our military. You know, there are people who have a lot of stars up there that are responsible for manning, training, and equipping our militaries. And so far, we've never fallen short. So just have confidence. We are doing our good. We're doing a good job as Americans. Don't let it get to you.
I feel like we're going to be turning a whole bunch of things around in the next 6 or 8 months. I just feel like but
that's one thing you can rest assured is the United States military is working hard every single day to protect and defend your right to be able to vote in 6 or 8 months and make.
Well,
this.
I'm voting in 2 months.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
I'm hoping the big change takes place in 6 months.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. So
I just saw on the news a lot of ships overseas, in near Israel and that whole area there. There were like 3 or 4 aircraft carriers and maybe more. So, I mean, I was encouraged when I saw that, but then I looked at it and said, "Oh my God, we're getting ready for something."
Oh no, we're definitely getting ready, and it's one thing that, thankfully, the current administration is deferring to the experts at the Pentagon in leaving the current carrier group out there and sending another one and not just doing the swap out, right? So, I mean, thankfully the right thing is being done there. I just happened to look at the numbers and said to myself, that's not a full force carrier strike group, because that's not what a strike group looks like.
But wasn't there like a super smart statesman, admiral, general somewhere along the line in history who said, hey, it doesn't really matter how many, and this is very paraphrased, how many toys you got, it really matters how smart you are and if you can outsmart them.
Oh, so, I definitely buy into that as well, but there's a balance there, right? Because I'm starting to feel over the last decade or so, when we see conflict taking place, we see that no matter what our intelligence tells us, no matter how smart our bombs and lasers are, no matter how much technological force that we can bring in there, and we're so much better technologically, and like you said, we can slim things down because of that. No matter what, the folks on the ground are able to overcome it. I mean, that's exactly what happened to Vietnam. We thought we were going to be political, smart, and strategic and surgical, and the locals were having nothing of it, right? They were able to overcome all the technology and all the downsizing and all the slimming that we did in the military. They were able to overcome that. And that's been the case for every war since, is that yes, we have gotten better with all of that, but at the same time, they've always found a way around it. They've always found a way to make it hurt.
So you are talking to the wrong girl about those.
I know.
Because I was a nurse for Navy, but I will tell you a story why you're talking to the wrong girl. So I'm an American Samoa. And, my house was surrounded by banana trees and papaya trees and had all this wonderful fruit, right? And I had my house had this beautiful little wraparound porch that was all screened in and it looked over the ocean. It was beautiful, right? So I found there were some bananas on a tree. So I went and I was like, I'm going to cut down these bananas and I'm going to let them ripen, because the locals told me you got to cut them down before the fruit bats get to them, and then you hang them, right? And then they ripen. So I brought them into my porch and I hung them. And the next day there was a hole in my screen. And I was like, dang it, the fruit bat must have, because they were too close to the screen, eaten through the screen. So I'll move them. So I put the bananas on the floor. And the next day, I had holes all over my screen. And I was like, what the beef? How did this happen? Right? So I then get the bananas out of the house, right? So I'm like clearly not smarter than what I thought was a fruit bat. Okay. Then I go on vacation. And I come back, and there was a hole in my screen. I could crawl through it. It was so big. And I was like, what the beep? What ate through this screen?
They learned.
Well, so then my house had that screen, and then it had the screen porch, and then my house was right here, and I had a window. And that had a screen on it, and there were little holes in the screen. And the little creature that was only about that big of a hole got in through there. And so then I had evidence that there was a mouse in my house. And this little mouse was very smart. This little mouse would take dryer sheets out of the dryer and make little beds like in the bottom of my stove. And then he crossed the line. He ran across my foot. And you do not run across the foot when you're a little mouse. So little mouse had to go. So now I consult the experts, right? The people in American Samoa, they know how to get rid of rats.
Sure.
So they told me, well, you got to buy those little sticky traps. And I was like, can't do it.
And they get stuck on it. They're still alive.
Yeah, cannot do it. Will not get a sticky trap. They were like, get a cat. And I was like, all right, you got a cat to loan me? And they were like, no, if we loan you our cat, then we have mice, right? So I was like, all right, so now I'm not getting a cat. So they said, well, you can buy some traps. So I go out and I buy have-a-heart traps. This little rascal he knew he was not getting in the hamburger trap. There was no way. So then I finally broke down and I was like, all right, he's got to go. Because he was really making a mess in my house and he was eating every screen I had. And I'm patching them and he's eating them as fast as I can patch them. So I went and got those little mouse traps, you know, the little spring thing.
Yeah.
And I charged them with dog food, little dog food pellets. I thought, okay, this is easy for me. And I lined them up on our little screen porch. You know, we had these little 2x4s, and so I lined them up. The next day I come out, the little mouse had turned the trap, taken the food, and not sprung the trap. So I was like, okay, clearly not smarter than an American Samoan
Sounds like
mouse.
that movie Mouse Hunt.
It was exactly mouse hunt. It became bad. So then I charged him with cheese. I wedged the cheese up there. Nope. He waited till the cheese got hard, and then he would pull it, and he didn't trigger the traps. And the traps are still turned everywhere I put them. And I put them everywhere there was a hole. And then he just like, honest to goodness. So then I tried peanut butter. Nope, didn't eat the peanut butter. This mouse, I could not get rid of him. So finally, see, this is how you got to outsmart your enemy, right? And it didn't matter how many tools I had. He was still smarter than me. A mouse of one was much smarter than this human being with a PhD and a bunch of mouse traps. So I'm still not winning the fight. I'm not winning the fight. So Shannon was sitting outside on the step, brushing the dog, and she's like, the mouse lives in the breadfruit tree, and he's eating that piece of breadfruit. I just saw him climb in there. Because, see, I couldn't put poison out because I had a bunch of dogs. The mouse was smart. He knew I couldn't put the poison out because it would kill the dogs, right? He's a very smart mouse. So I stuck 2 little pellets up in the breadfruit tree, and we never saw the mouse again.
There you go.
See? So you had to be smarter than the mouse, and it's just to the point, right? Doesn't matter how many tools you have. Gotta be able to outsmart the enemy.
That's exactly
Gotta outsmart
what
the
I was
enemy.
getting at. But no, you're absolutely right. So I'm just concerned that we're going too far down that path and we're not thinking at that level, right?
Well, really, what this should tell you is if I'm not smarter than a mouse, I really can't answer that question.
No, I honestly didn't think you were going to be able to answer that. No. I mean, I know. I just wanted to get it out there.
I know,
You're the
I know.
highest-ranking Navy person in this room, so
And it probably feels very frustrating, because I think the news doesn't really give us a full picture. I don't watch the news, so I don't see the news. So whatever you saw, I haven't seen anyway.
I've started to watch it. I read it once a day, and I don't actually watch it unless there's actually some major event. So the last time I was actually watching the news was July 13th. That was the last time I was actually glued to the TV, right? Because there was something going on that was concerning. So I read, but that particular theme has been going on for years, the whole downsizing, and it's getting to this point where there's conflicts all over the world, people in crisis all over the world, and we're feeling like we're falling behind because there's a few more conflicts that are on the on-deck circle right now, right? We got Taiwan and China, and we've got a few on-deck things that are ready to go if a few things fall in the wrong direction. So.
Yeah. And, even if I wanted to offer information, I don't have access to it, so.
Well, it sounds like you're really enjoying your job.
I do like the job. I only was ever going to go back to the Pentagon for one thing and one thing only, and I really feel strongly about women, peace, and security. So for those of you who remember, when I campaigned, my biggest issue was national security. Yeah. And every candidate that came to New Hampshire during the presidential, Democrat and Republican alike, I pulled them aside. I said, tell me how are you going to handle national security in this country? That's my biggest issue. We all have an issue, right? And for me right now, just as you pointed out, we've got a lot of hot spots going on across the globe. And for me, I want to make sure that my daughter has the same opportunity, if not more, and your children. And, when our nation isn't secure, then that isn't going to happen. And so national security is super important to me. And women, peace, and security for me is my little piece out of my uniform that I can offer for national security. If we can bring peaceful negotiations and peace across the world in a way that stops conflict from happening, then I'm all about it. I'm not in Congress. I'm not the President of the United States. I'm not in a place where I can effectuate national security by an elected position, but I can effectuate national security by policy that I provide to our United States Navy in a way that hopefully will keep our nation from going to war. And if that is the best I can do, then that's what I'm going to do. Because I've made a promise to the people of the state of New Hampshire that I was going to take care of them, and this may be the only way I get to do it. I was never going to give up, right?
Right. So, aside from all of that, you're now in D.C. full time. Well,
just working.
Yeah,
I live in New Hampshire.
Right, but you're there most of your week, right?
Yeah, I go there to work. Yeah.
Okay. How are you liking being in the Beltway? Does it feel scummy, like all the people that you have to commute to work with?
No, because I live in Arlington, so I live in Northern Virginia, where I stay during the week, Monday through Friday. I stay in Northern Virginia, and then I take a bus. It's 6 minutes to work, and then I'm isolated in the Pentagon. And if you haven't been to the Pentagon, it's not inside the swamp, right?
Oh no! Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's right on the outskirts, right? And the Pentagon doesn't feel they try to stay away from politics, right? Because national security is one of the few places, even though there's a lot of political appointees in there, meaning, the generals and the admirals are all confirmed by the Senate.
Yeah, everybody 3-star and up.
Yeah, they're confirmed by the Senate, but at the same day, and the Secretary of Defense, that's a political appointee, and there's some undersecretaries that are appointees, right? But for the most part, it's a pretty respectful place. I haven't really hit any resistance. But like anything, you got to be credible, you got to be respectful, and you're gonna get credibility and respect back if you act that way.
You go and hang out at Arlington Cemetery.
I do go to Arlington a lot.
Smithsonian, the Air and Space. I can't go without going to the.
No, I go to Arlington to visit Teddy.
Yep.
So
I noticed that.
Yeah, I go there
every year.
Yeah, I go a lot. Yeah, I go visit Teddy.
Yeah,
So Eric.
my grandparents are there.
Oh,
so
are they?
Yeah.
Where are they? What section?
509. I think 509. I actually have it on my phone. I'm not going to read
text
it.
to
I'm
me.
not going to
I'll
read
go
it
visit
out
him.
loud. But my grandfather's there. World War II, Korea, Vietnam.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And my grandmother's with him. So.
Aww.
So that's my stop every time I drive through the
You
area.
should. Yeah, it's a very beautiful
But
place.
I can't get enough of the Air and Space, and also over at Dulles, the
big Air and
annex,
Space over there.
the annex
yeah.
over at Dulles. Those are my
Yeah.
two favorite
Well, the
places to go.
Smithsonian's are definitely national treasure for sure, and folks need to go visit it when they can. Yeah.
Yep. All right, I think that's
Are we out
all
of
we
time?
have. We are out
Wow.
of time.
Thanks so much for having me.
No,
Oh my
thanks,
gosh, it's
Lynne.
always fun to see you guys. And
Come visit us anytime you're in the area.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. You guys look fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Treating you well. And
Is this your first time in the new studio?
yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't been in the new studio
It's
yet.
much brighter.
Oh, it's very
much
nice.
brighter.
Very, very nice.
And we actually have high definition video. I mean, oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
First class.
Yeah.
Hey, that's all good.
All right, folks, next week is the first membership meeting at Wilson Hill Pistol Club of the winter session. So Wednesday, first Wednesday of every month, 7 p.m., 1732 Lakeshore Road, right here in Manchester. Hope to see you there. That's next week after the show. Anything else?
You're going to be alone next week. I'm going to be at debates at New
Yeah,
England
we have
College
debates here in
for,
New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Ooh, who's debating?
Well, the governor's CD2, CD1. They're going Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday
Holy
at a
smokes.
great facility now at New England College. They've done a great job.
Oh, very
Looking
good.
forward to that.
And we have a CD candidate next week, Holly Noveski.
Right.
Will be
she's
on with
won.
me next week.
CD1?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
very good.
So we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.